Hey guys, how we doing? So we're back on another Super Eye Patch Wolf video, and this one piqued my interest because I've not watched Cowboy Bebop in a very long time. I used to watch it when I was younger. It was one of the few things on TV that I would watch of an evening if I was still up on CNX, I think it was called. Doesn't exist anymore. It was like Cartoon Network's extension channel thing. They were trying with anime stuff and over night time and things like that. But anyway, let's get into this. Because I remember Cowboy Bebop being really good. I mean, I have not gone back and watched it for a while, but anyway, why you should watch Cowboy Bebop.
I'm always fascinated by the idea of formative media. That is to say, fascinated with the idea of media we consume in our formative years,
Right.
say from the ages of around 12 to 18. And how that period of our lives affects how we might view it.
Right.
Whoever you talk to, it's often with a sense of
So good.
reverence that people discuss their favourite games, TV shows, and movies they experienced when they were a teenager.
Yeah.
But also, I think it makes it quite difficult when returning to such media many years later, as it's media we experienced when we were arguably at our most vulnerable and least sure of our own identity,
Okay.
and something we may have clung to in a world of whirling hormones and ambiguous, hard-to-grasp social norms. I think this period of vulnerability means that we consume media with more sensitivity than we do at any other point in our lives, and thus respond more strongly to it.
I suppose that's true.
For instance, ask anyone what their favourite PlayStation 1 Final Fantasy is,
7.
and it will most likely be the one they experienced at the earliest in their adolescence.
Oh, okay.
It's often with a little
I see what you
trepidation
mean.
that I go back to games and anime from this period, for the reason that it can be a real disappointment to return to one of your favourite series, only to find out that it doesn't hold up in the cold light of post-adolescence.
Right, like Thundercats.
But there is an
Thundercats is
inverse to
awful.
this also, and that is when we go back to something many years later, not only to find that it stood the test of time, but that it resonates with you harder than ever before.
Right.
And for me,
Cowboy
my
Bebop?
most recent
Okay.
experience of this was upon rewatching one of my favourite anime probably ever,
Cool.
Cowboy Bebop.
It's so
I first
cool.
experienced Bebop in a late-night block of animation on an old UK television channel called CNS,
Hey!
where it would play between Outlaw Star
Yeah.
and Spawn the animated series.
Woo, I wasn't
and
wrong.
one of my clearest memories I have from being a teenager was sitting down each and every night and
That's
watching
so
these
bad.
shows. And while I was initially more taken with the bright and colourful world of Outlaw Star, as well as the more violent, edgy
Spawn was-
world of Spawn,
yeah.
over time I grew increasingly entranced with the subtle narratives of Spike, Jet, and Faye.
So cool.
Until I got to the point where I would have happily sat rewatching the same episodes of Bebop night after night.
Right.
The funny thing is, I think if you were to ask me why I liked the show at the time, I don't think I really could have explained it very well.
No.
On the surface, it's a simple story about a bunch of jerk bounty hunters in space
Yeah.
floating from misadventure to misadventure. And I get the feeling I wouldn't really have been able to articulate some of the more complicated themes of the show,
No.
or some of the more subtle feelings it set off inside me. Fortunately, however, I am a little older now, and can probably
Just a bit.
take a far better stab at it. And yes, that, my friends, is exactly the purpose we're gathered here for.
Cool.
So let's sit back, relax, and talk about
Why
you should watch
Cowboy Bebop.
Cowboy Bebop.
Cool.
Cowboy Bebop was produced in 1997 by Studio
My
Sunrise
God.
and directed by Shinichiro Watanabe,
Cool.
who was, up until this point, best known for his works on features like Macross Plus and Mobile Suit Gundam 0083,
Wow.
Stardust Memories. He was joined by the dream team of writer Kieko Nobumoto, character designer Toshiro Kawamoto, music composer Yoko Kanno, and mechanical art designer
The
Kishimoto
music.
Yamane. And I single out each member of the team by name because each one was a heavy hitter in their own discipline.
Oh, okay.
And while watching Bebop, it's easy to make out the distinctive fingerprint of each individual person. Even me, who generally does not give a flying fuck about mecha or machine
Yeah.
design, has to appreciate the craft and thought that's gone into even the smallest mechanical on-screen object.
Yeah.
And this same care can be felt in every part of Bebop, from the beautiful character designs to
Look at
the
that.
moody atmospheric backgrounds to the utterly fantastic soundtrack,
Oh god, yes.
which can go from flashy up-tempo jazz
Doodle,
to
doodle, doodle.
downtrodden blues, all the while maintaining a distinctive voice and atmosphere
Yeah.
unique to Cowboy Bebop.
class.
The show has a nearly seamless quality to it. The direction, animation, and soundtrack work well enough that it often makes it difficult to consider each individual one in isolation, and there's just a flow to the series simply unlike anything else. And it makes following the story of our bounty hunter protagonists, Spike, Jet, and Faye, an utter pleasure. And despite how weighty some of the broader themes of the show are, cruising the galaxy and spending time with these three vagabonds is an incredible amount of fun. There's lively, exciting displays of martial arts prowess, clever and engaging back and forths as the characters argue in a way that only close friends can, and some terrific visual comedy. I'm particularly fond of any scene featuring Ed and Hein. The show has this beautiful, varied and mixed tone to it. Read any interview with director Watanabe and you'll quickly learn what a total film nerd he is. And this can be felt in the very small ways, like the subtle nods to American 80s sci-fi and action cinema, to the very large, like how each episode seems to have its own specific genre, like the western-infused cowboy funk, or the hard-boiled police drama of Black Dog Serenade. Sci-fi, Chinese martial arts, 80s action, blaxploitation cinema, there's a looseness and a vibrancy in the feel of each episode, and no two ever feel even remotely similar. Just compare the vibrant and fun atmosphere of Mushroom Samba, where the crew spends nearly an entire episode high on mushrooms, to the nightmare-inducing horror neo-noir of Pierrot Le Fou, in which Spike attempts to track down a deranged and extremely dangerous, insane floating psychopath. We'll be spending most of our time with the series with the crew of the titular Bebop spaceship, and as main cast go, they're about as likeable and charming as they come. We have our main protagonist Spike, a wily and skilled bounty hunter whose chilled and often playful demeanour hide a man haunted by his time spent working as a hitman for a brutal crime syndicate. We have Jet, a man of principles and old-fashioned way of doing things, whose commitment to doing what he thinks is right forced him out of a corrupt police force and into the life of a bounty hunter. And finally Faye, a deceptive con woman with a penchant for drinking, gambling, and mayhem.
She's cool.
All the while dealing with the fact that she's essentially alone in the universe. A cryogenics accident meaning she was frozen for several decades and awoke in a future she didn't understand, her own past a mystery. Kind of like a really pretty Fry from Futurama. If you notice a theme among this triad of lost souls, it's the one, they're all in their own way dealing with loneliness. But second, each one is in one way or another haunted by the events of their past. And this is a major theme throughout Cowboy Bebop. What strikes me most about Cowboy Bebop's story is how adult it is. And I don't mean that in terms of having gratuitous violence or large amounts of sexual content.
The theme.
I mean that Cowboy Bebop is a show distinctly about being an adult. Whereas a lot of anime begin their story at the beginning of a character's narrative arc, the path that will lead them on a road to self-discovery. Our characters here have kind of already been through their arcs by the time episode 1 starts. The crew of the Bebop have all lived significant lives up until this point. This isn't a group of characters coming of age and discovering who they really are, but instead 3 jaded adults who are all in their own way trying to escape those exact same realizations. I think it's interesting to think how if you rewind the clock a couple of years, you'd have a much simpler story. The mafia hitman who fell in love with the wrong person, the last clean police officer fighting a corrupt system, a woman with amnesia trying to figure out her past. But instead, all those events are distant in the rear-view mirrors of our characters' lives. And I think it says a lot about the themes of the show that it's at this later stage that we're introduced to our characters. While the crew of the Bebop work well individually, and there are several episodes showing this, where the cast really comes into its own is in the dynamic that's formed between them. I can remember reading the book Bossy Pants by Tina Fey, and in it she talks about when creating the characters of Jack, Liz, and Tracy from the show 30 Rock, she wanted 3 characters who, if you presented them with the same exact problem, would all come up with solutions entirely different to one another. And when you look at a lot of the best ensemble casts in fiction, this same pattern seems to appear again and again. I can't imagine a single situation that Yusuke, Kuwabara, Hiei, or Kurama would ever approach in a fashion that is in any way similar. Same for the squad of JoJo's Part 4, and of course, the same is true of the crew of the Bebop. Positioning characters at odds with each other like this means that each one is forced to, at some point, justify their own way of doing things, and thus it lets us learn more about them without ever feeling like forced exposition dumps. And a lot of these moments can be very subtle, like when Faye asks Jet why he just doesn't get reconstructive surgery on his robotic arm, and he's defensive to the point that it's obvious that there's probably a story there, and one that is told later on in the episode Black Dog Serenade. There's also a surprising amount of subtlety and nuance in the crew of the Bebop. I love these simple scenes of Spike working out or practicing kung fu, Jet tending to his bonsai plants, or Faye lounging and watching old videotapes in her room. While not significant scenes to either the episodic or overall plot, they do convey the idea that these are characters with mundane lives, only briefly punctuated by flashes of excitement, and not just fictional cartoon characters hopping from one flashy misadventure to the next. The other member of the crew is Ed, and I wait till now to bring her up as she contrasts so heavily with every other character in the show. A young savant hacker, Ed joins the crew of the Bebop later on in episode 9, and not only does she not have a past she's trying to run from, she's not an adult. Life hasn't taken its toll on her in the same way it has Spike and the others, and she still views the world with a level of enthusiasm and fascination entirely unique to her. She provides a lot of the comedic relief of the show, but I think just boiling her down to that role is to misunderstand her place within the group. While her computer skills are indeed useful, it always seemed to me that the others took her in as a replacement for what each one of them has individually lost.
Yeah,
and
what's
that is
missing,
a carefree youth. And maybe I'm reading too much into it, but given how focused literally every other character in the show is on their past, I suspect that this may have been an intentional move on the creator's part. Another huge part of the appeal of Cowboy Bebop is the unique vision of a dystopian future it takes place in. Set in the year 2071, the Earth has suffered a string of massive catastrophes after an astral gate exploded and destroyed a large portion of the moon. And so humanity has scattered across the galaxy, settling on the different planes of Mars, Jupiter, Venus, and Ganymede. There's a lot of smaller touches that make this world feel so succinct and alive. The world has its own media. There's all these different shows within shows. Like on this flight when we see some kind of knockoff Tom and Jerry show, or the silly bounty series Spike and Co. get their information from. You can also see this in all the unusual and inventive technology. And I don't even just mean the impressively designed spaceships, but everything from the facial recognition software used by Spike and the crew to the mechanized ashtrays that appear in a casino. Every new environment brings with it some reimagining of modern technology, and it really gives this feeling of a universe set within our own, but at the same time feeling alien and unique. Another interesting thing about Cowboy Bebop's future is how it completely lacks any feeling of uniformity or any strong presence of an overarching governmental system.
Yeah, there's nothing like that, is there?
What we get are destroyed remnants of human culture, shot into a million galactic pockets. Or, as Watanabe himself puts it, statelessness rather than multinationalism. Meaning that each person within Bebop's universe feels more tied to their own personal creed rather than a larger whole. This results in a highly varied cast of supporting characters, coming from every social, racial, and religious background imaginable. And it gives this sense that no one in Bebop's world really has a solid place within it. That just like Faye, Jet, and Spike,
everyone's
they're all just
trying to
drifting. And I think one of the core joys of the show is experiencing some of these different stories as our protagonists cross paths with various different individuals. Some are just good people who have had some really, really tough breaks, and each one is highly memorable in their own right, helped in no small part by some utterly stunning character design.
They look so good.
The sheer diversity in appearance among its cast is pretty incredible. It's a show not afraid to have characters from every walk of life, not afraid to age characters, not afraid to have them look unattractive, and many of Bebop's episodes revolve around our crew's life briefly intersecting with these characters, and their stories run the gambit from whimsical and entertaining, like the encounter with Cowboy Andy, to the utterly crushing, like when Jet realizes that a new bounty target is the lover of his ex-girlfriend Alyssa, who he himself never quite got over. I think it's interesting to note that while each episode brings a host of new faces and characters, once their episode's over, we never see them again, nor are they mentioned by the crew of the Bebop. This really gives the impression of a ships passing in the night kind of deal. Like Spike, Jet, and Faye meet all these different kinds of people with different stories, And after a while, it gives an impression of a universe filled with countless different people,
There's a
all
lot.
of whom have their own narrative, and only a tiny fraction of which we encounter. And there's a certain sadness to it, as it's like Spike, Jet, and Faye can only get so involved in a person's life before moving on.
Yeah,
See
go.
Digibro's video titled "You're Going to Carry That Weight" for more on that.
Oh, okay.
The show also looks consistently incredible, but I think in a way that perhaps is a little more subtle than most modern anime. As Bebop was produced in a period entirely before digital compositing was common in the industry. Digital compositing is the process of combining the character and the background and then adding all the lighting, atmosphere, and environmental effects in order to make the end product look as finished as possible.
Okay.
And next to the digitization of hand-drawn animation, it's probably the biggest advance in the industry in the last 10 years.
Look how good that
and
looks.
arguably the biggest visual indicator of a show's age, as many shows prior to its popularization tend to have a simpler, flatter look, at least in terms of lighting and effects. And Cowboy Bebop is totally one of these shows, which means that at first glance it might look more basic than something like, say, the Fate series, but judging it by this metric can lead to you missing out on the mega strong points of its production. While there's generally one or two fantastic action scenes in an episode, aside from this, the animation can actually be pretty limited. But I think where the show's true strength lies isn't with the amount of drawings in a scene, but with the quality of each individual one. No one ever really just stands straight. Each character has a particular gesture and feeling in any given scene, and more often than not, a character's posture will tell you more about how they are feeling than their actual dialogue. This is a word we come back to a lot on this channel, but there is an expressiveness to the way each character is posed. You can particularly see this with Ed. I could quite easily see this character being far more irritating if her animation didn't do such a good job of selling her offbeat, idiosyncratic personality.
Amazing.
Every scene she's in, there's a sense that the animators are trying to move her in a way that's uniquely distinct to her. And though less obvious in other characters, you can see the same attention to detail, whether it's Spike's consistently relaxed and laid-back slouch, the differences in the way Faye carries herself when she's around people as opposed to when she's not, or Jet's consistently tense, upright, rigid posture. Every character in Bebop's world carries a distinct body language, and I think this, just as much as the terrific voice acting or sharp dialogue, goes into establishing its characters as believable and tangible. The colour and lighting is another area worth mentioning. While the crew all have their standard colour palettes inside the Bebop ship itself,
they all stand out, don't
whenever they go outside, there's often subtle differences in how their palettes are treated. Just look at the somber purples and pinks of episode 10, Ganymede Elegy, versus the harsh black shadows of Pierre LeFou. Each location has its own palette and feel, and this pushes the various unique atmosphere of each episode, and adds to what is, as a whole, an incredibly strong production. I could go on here: the camera angles, the composition, the way the music is used in often contradictory ways to what's happening on screen. But if you want to see it all beautifully on display, then check out episode 5, Ballad of Fallen Angels, in which we see Spike and his arch-nemesis Vicious face off in a ruined church for the first time. Each individual element comes together to create one of the most intense and memorable encounters of this or any other show. And so finally, we come to the part of the video where I talk about the faults, and I'd have to say it is genuinely really difficult for me to think of much of any. Hell, I even enjoy the to be continued sections listening to the characters back and forth over the preview. And that could just be the nostalgia talking, but regardless, here are my super granular, inconsequential criticisms of Cowboy Bebop. Its highly episodic nature means that inevitably some episodes are less entertaining than others, with the odd divergence or side character who fails to live up to the rest. But at the same time, I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a single episode that had me anything less than thoroughly entertained. Okay, I'm really stretching here, but I feel like maybe, just maybe, a little potential was lost with the character of Ian the dog. And only because the plot builds him up as this hyper-intelligent data dog, whose intellectual capacity is meant to rival that of a human. But we never really see this. He just acts like a regular dog. And maybe some indication of his intelligence.
I have a cuddly eye somewhere.
Like, I don't know, a pair of glasses, or a pipe. Oh god, what am I doing with my life? The final criticism I have, and this really is the non-criticism of all non-criticisms, is that Cowboy Bebop ends.
Yeah.
The conclusion of episode 26 is about as definitive and final as they come, and except for a pretty decent movie that takes place between episodes 22 and 23, Cowboy Bebop has never been and probably will never be heard from again. Of course, how much of an actual fault this is entirely dependent on your perspective. I certainly don't have issue with it, but I do feel that the success of Bebop has cast somewhat of a long shadow over the rest of Watanabe's work.
Yeah.
Since Bebop, he's directed Samurai Champloo, Kids on the Slope, and Space Dandy, which have very distinct.
Do you know what, Space Dandy? I can see like the similarities.
And personally, I think that's a really good thing. There's nothing worse than watching a creator continue a series they themselves have lost passion for. And while I can't speak for Kids on the Slope, having never watched it,
I've not watched that either.
I do feel that Samurai Champloo and Space Dandy have their own unique charm and should be.
I've only seen the first episode of Samurai
But inevitably, people often cite their perceived failure to live up to one of the best-loved anime series in history, which I think is perhaps a little
Space Dandy is brilliant.
And we're probably going to talk about both at some point in the future. So, in all this time, we haven't really touched on what could be considered the core plot of Cowboy Bebop, and that is the conflict between Spike and the series' major villain, Vicious, a psychotic criminal mob boss who recently ascended in power due to a bloody coup. I think out of all the great character designs in Bebop, Vicious is possibly one of the most striking.
Look at that.
Tall and lean, his face is often obscured by disheveled grey hair, which often bathe his deep-set eyes in shadow, giving the character this subdued but at the same time wild and unpredictable feel.
Evil.
He's often seen with his unnamed pet bird, who is a cormorant. And interestingly enough, a cormorant is said to be the type of bird that Satan took the form of at the top of the Tree of Life in order to spy on Adam and Eve.
Cool.
Which has some real dark connotations when you relate this back to Vicious and his relationship with Spike and their mutual love interest, Julia.
Damn.
Of the 26 episodes of the series, only 5 of them are dedicated to furthering the Spike-Vicious plotline, and it's in these episodes we really see a different side of Spike, who disregards all sense of his own well-being and runs headlong into suicidal situations in order to face off against Vicious one more time and finally put his past to rest. However, while these are some of the best and most memorable episodes in the entire show, I think in considering them the core plot, you can kind of miss the point of the show as a whole. Aside from the 5 episodes previously mentioned, there's a startling similarity with the vast majority of Bebop's stories. And that is that our characters don't really learn anything from episode to episode.
No.
There's no moral, there's no higher message. In fact, most of the time our characters will end up in a very similar situation at the end of an episode than when they started. And sure, they see some weird and even tragic things, but neither they nor the plot ever really progress. Which is odd when you compare that to how most other shows work. But there's a reason for that, and that's because Cowboy Bebop is not a story about character progression. It's not something where our heroes end up better at the end than they do at the start. It's not something where lessons are learned and victories are won. What it is about is all the little scars that life leaves on you, and how at certain points we're all just looking for ways to cope. This is why Spike, Jet, and Faye choose to spend their time travelling from planet to planet chasing bounties. All the little misadventures, the plot lines that don't go anywhere, the characters we never see again, they're all just distractions for the crew of the Bebop. Distractions they need from a life that has worn each one of them down individually. And this is why, if you ask the teenage me to explain Cowboy Bebop, I probably wouldn't have been able to.
No.
Because I was not there yet.
You hadn't grown up
I
yet.
had never gotten fired. I had never told anyone I didn't want to see them anymore. I hadn't really lived that much. And it's only returning to the series now that I'm able to recognize these things within it. Most of my videos are centered around the idea of convincing someone to watch a show they've never seen before. And if you haven't experienced Cowboy Bebop, then I hope this video has convinced you to do so.
I'm gonna have to go back and watch it.
But if you have seen it, especially in your younger years, then you, my friend, are whom I'm really speaking to here. If you, like me, first watched this show in a younger life, then I encourage you to return to it with everything you know now, and watch as the show transforms into something else entirely. Cowboy Bebop is a brilliantly entertaining show, something that's exciting, funny, and heartwarming. But it's also a beautifully sad story of loneliness and our inabilities to ever really move on from our past. In other words, it's a story distinctly about being an adult. And this, friends, really is why you should watch Cowboy Bebop.
Fair enough.
Friends, thank you for joining me on the first Why You Should Watch of 2017. And if you enjoyed this video and feeling like helping out your old buddy Eyepatch Wolf, then consider heading over to my Patreon and kicking in $1 or $2 to help out with the creation of future videos. And in doing so, you'll also be able to see your name listed with this amazingly charming and attractive group of people right here, of whom I am insanely grateful. I'd also like to give a huge shout out and thank you to the crazy talented sax dragon, Carl Catron, who took on the monumental task of providing this video with his own renditions of the Cowboy Bebop music. You guys should seriously check his stuff out. His rendition of Tank is absolutely amazing. You can of course find me on Twitter at @EyepatchWolf or come hang out in the Let's Play of Bosscast as we discuss horror gaming, Resident Evil 7, and some awful Final Fantasy 15 revelations. Friends, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.
Cool. So yeah, I need to go back and watch Cowboy Bebop, I guess then. I do remember it being pretty damn awesome, but like again, I couldn't really explain why. You're completely right. I need to go back, watch it, and experience it as an adult. I guess it's a bit weird saying I'm an adult. I don't like saying that because I'm so immature. But yeah, I guess I'll have to go back. I'll take your word for it. Super Eyepatch Wolf, you are a dude. So yeah. That was that. I love how I mentioned the CNX thing at the start, and then he was like, I used to watch this on CNX, like yeah. So I went wrong about the channel name. I was like, oh. So yeah, and I've got little lines quiddly somewhere, and I have I've got Ed, Jet, Spike, and Faye, all those Funko Pops as well up there. So anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. What did you guys think of that? What did you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave comments down below, let me know what I should watch and discuss in future videos, and I'll see you guys, just all you guys, next time.